You may not consider yourself one for conspiracy theories. You easily tackle misinformation online, and extremism is something you only hear about on the news. But the impact of these developments is much closer than you think. Social media algorithms, which most of us use on a daily basis, are designed to create revenue. Given that heightened emotions on social media platforms often lead to increased engagement and subsequently more revenue, they wield significant influence over what we encounter. This growing phenomenon is having a direct impact on the perceptions of democratic institutions and trust in science. At worst, it has the ability to attempt to overthrow or disrupt democratically elected governments. Extreme political narratives have been rising across Europe, and these narratives influence mainstream political discourses and policies. It's about you, me, and the lives we lead. As a generation born in a time before the internet, there was a growing concern for those in the middle age. Not being digital natives, this group often still used traditional routes to gain information, such as print media, TV, and radio, but at the same time are engaging in online media. Without the tools to navigate, they rely on their perception of credible sources, making them easy targets for extremist narratives and misinformation through social media. This group of middle-aged adults between the ages of 45 and 65 is under-researched, but the impact of them being drawn into extremist content may have significant consequences on political discourse, democratic processes, and institutions, as they form a large group of people who may also be in decision-making positions, such as managers and policymakers, therefore have a direct influence on those who live in democracies like you and me. In this podcast, we will talk with experts in the field of research surrounding conspiracy theories and misinformation, joining both strength and knowledge in the newly founded SMIDGE Project. Research centers, universities, and NGOs from all over Europe will shine their light on new research findings and counter-narratives, education, and also training resources that are being developed to address fake news and misinformation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smidgecast. I'm Ella Anderson, your host, and today we're diving into responsible research in the digital age, ethical challenges and solutions. We'll be exploring ethical dilemmas in data collection, privacy, and surveillance, the concerns around using AI in research, and the complexity of algorithm-driven studies. To help us unpack these complex issues, I'm delighted to welcome back our esteemed guest, Sara Wilford from the Montfort University. As many of you know, the Montfort University was not only pivotal in launching this project, but also in shaping its visionary concept. Welcome to our show again, Sara. It's great to have you with us. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Thank you very much.
Well, let's dive into the topic. How do you define the key ethical challenges posed by emerging technologies like AI, especially in relation to data privacy and surveillance?
There are more ethical challenges now because of AI than there were in the past. So, I mean, a lot of the things that we've been talking about in the project has been about things like misinformation, and the growth of AI has actually meant that is even more likely. So they're now creating deep fakes that are getting more and more difficult to actually work out whether or not they are true. And also, I mean, with regards to data privacy and surveillance, the problems there are that actually AI is being trained on data that is gathered all over. So, I mean, I think there's a petition out currently from a load of authors who are basically getting really upset because AI is being trained on their published works without permission, without attribution. There's a huge amount of data being collected and training this AI. Now, it is a bit of a problem because in order to have accurate AI, we need to have accurate data. So it needs to be fed a huge amount of it. The problem is that the companies that are developing AI are not asking for permission. They're not actually giving anybody any money for any of the data that they are using, and they're not attributing. So that is one of the biggest issues, I think, for data privacy. And with regards to surveillance, using AI to track and trace people, which is basically what happens on social media and on the internet. You know, it is a form of track and trace. It's a form of surveillance. These bots follow you around the internet, and, you know, they understand what you like, what you click on.
I would like to dive deeper into the part you mentioned about AI and also misinformation, or AI being fed by misinformation, because It is a growing problem in the AI era. What do you see is the biggest risk and what makes AI generated misinformation especially challenging to tackle?
I think, well, there's one or two problems with that. The first is that what we have at the moment is unbridled development without really much in the way of human oversight. Everybody is running around. Here's this new tech. We can use it for various things and let's do the development. And they're not taking perhaps sufficient steps back every now and again just to go, hang on, is this a good thing? Do we have potential unintended consequences of what we're doing? So I think we've got a problem at the moment. It's a bit of a wild west out there. And I think without that human oversight, there will be unintended consequences. Now, that can be things, very serious things, and not so serious things. They can be things that are on an individual level and on a much wider level. So for example, on an individual level, we could be in a world where no matter how much you try to explain, the AI still says no to you because of ticking various AI-based boxes, whereas a human would be more able to understand the nuance of your life. So this blunt instrument of utilizing AI to make major decisions is of concern. And as I've said many times before, one of the bigger problems is actually the wider problem of concern about democracy and decision makers. So we have quite a few examples around the world. The US is not the only place, but it is one that we're most aware of currently, where decisions about policy are being made by people who are not necessarily accurately informed. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily that, there may well be some malicious actors who are doing this on purpose for political gain. But if we just take a step back a moment and go, okay, let's assume that people genuinely believe X, Y, or Z, because that's what the information that they've got. If they genuinely believe that and then go and make policy, this is back to the Smidge middle age group, of course, who are the ones who are making the policy and are in power and making all of these decisions. And if they're making those decisions based on AI generated fake news, misinformation, disinformation, we're in a very difficult place to actually resolve that. It's going to be quite problematic for society. You can't make decisions based on falsehood.
That answer kind of leads us automatically to the next question. I think most platforms used by the middle age, are Facebook and Instagram, and they increasingly feature the AI-generated content you mentioned. How do these algorithms contribute to the spread of misinformation, and specifically, what risks should we be paying attention to?
The funny thing is, this is stuff that we've known about for a while prior to AI, or rather prior to AI becoming such a big deal. So one of the things we know about all of these platforms is that engagement is the key. That is what they want, more and more engagement. You want you to stay on the platform as long as possible, exposure to advertisers and all of that sort of thing. So we've got two things going on. First, we've got the actual content created by AI that is societally damaging, and the algorithm will be promoting that because it get people wound up, they get upset, they get outraged, and that is much more likely to elicit sharing of the content than, oh, that's a nice, cute, fluffy cat picture. We already know that, the more outraged people are, the more angry and upset they are, the more likely they are to engage and to go further down the rabbit hole and share and all the rest of it. So I think what we have it's like a compounding effect. We already had the algorithms moving things around according to preferences and presenting people with content that fit with their worldview as perceived by the algorithm. Now we're in a situation whereby an artificial intelligent algorithm is going to do the same thing. So it's going to be more nuanced, more cleverly tailored, less easy to actually discern, which takes me back to what I said a moment ago about the lack of human oversight. We can't have AI policing AI. That always ends in failure, doesn't it? For example, we have media organizations like the newspapers and the press, and that quite often they are self-regulated, and quite often we find that as an absolute failure, right? That we find out that they're doing untoward things, and we don't find out till later. So the phone hacking in the UK is a very good example of that. So yeah, I think the problem here is that AI is even more so. And that is going to many times over make this situation worse. Make it hard.
Yeah. Well, let's bring in that human perspective, because from an ethics perspective, what are risks of these algorithmic biases? I mean, you mentioned, of course, AI, checking AI, but when it comes to public policy making, well, decision making, what are the risks and how can we address these?
Human beings are nuanced. Human beings are complex. You know, human beings are a bit messy, really. And we're not like machines. We can't be put into pigeonhole boxes. And this means that AI cannot really be ethical per se, because it does not have that understanding of nuance. Everything is put into, well, all algorithmic computerized systems that work the same way. You know, it's a case of categorizing, putting things into different categories and boxes and all the rest of it. And that means that if we utilize something like that to make decisions about messy humans, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be people that fall down through the gaps in the social security safety nets, the health safety nets, the mental health safety nets, all of these different things which we at the moment are, we try to catch people before they fall. Or, so we don't end up with hordes of people on the streets or whatever it is. This could be to do with financial support as well. So the complexity of that and the coldness of the machine means that a lot of our public policy is there for one reason. It's there for the humans that live within our society. And if we then say, well, the humans are less important than the machine, what is the point? One of the things that I say to my students, when I'm talking to them about software development and the ethics of that, and I ask them this question, I say, what are you doing it for? Who are you doing it for? And the answer is always for humans, always, because even if, like I pointed out to them once, even if it's a tiny valve in a water treatment system that is, right in the center of the machine, if that fails, it will affect humans, animals, the environment. So it doesn't really, there's nothing you are doing as a developer that doesn't impact humans. So the idea of having a machine making decisions about humans is a real concern for society going forward. It's a real worry that we will use the old joke of the computer says no will no longer be a joke.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about humans and how humans make these machines, make these computers, make AI. But I would also like to talk how we use AI. We leave a lot of personal data when it comes to AI. Could you explain the ethical concerns related to the use of personal data for research and how these concerns can be mitigated?
Yeah, the use of AI in research is something that is growing all of the time. And we do need to be aware and to flag these things, because one of the problems about the use of AI is the worries of manipulation, the worries about tracking and tracing people, and basically infringing upon their personal space, their autonomy, their data. So there are already mitigations in place. We have GDPR, which obviously does go an awful long way to ensure that, it provides us with a gold standard at this moment in time about privacy and data. So what we've got to make sure is that those using AI are following exactly the same rules as those who aren't using AI. And that takes me back to the concerns like over Meta and Zuckerberg taking author data. So one of the things about GDPR is all about, making sure you only use things with permission, that you only You get informed consent, that you're concerned about the privacy of the person or the organizations that you've got that data from, that you are very cautious about access and only provide access to that data by authorized people, and that the processing and distribution of that data is done within very, very sort of strict and controlled parameters. Now, that's absolutely wonderful. We've got that in place and it does a lot of good. The standard, if you like, of ethical expectation. I see a lot of proposals in my other work for the European Commission, and there is a lot of buy-in to actually trying to do the right thing. Marvelous. AI, on the other hand, doesn't. AI is a bit of a free-for-all maverick beast that crawls around the internet, in theory, and grabbing and sucking in all this data without permission, without consent. We have no idea what really is being done with that data. We don't know if it's being skewed. We don't know if it's being put into certain categories that maybe we wouldn't agree with. I mean, it's a dark black hole. That is the biggest ethical issue, I think, with AI. It's how it's actually using this data, how much data is it getting, and the fact that it's not asking for consent. I say it. I'm referring to the various different organizations that are using data to train their AIs. This, for me, is the biggest concern. It seems like all of the rules that we had for the processing and distribution, storage of personal data and everything else has just gone out of the window in favor of development of AI. And I do think also that authorities and governments and everybody's almost enamored with it. So they can't see. It's like, here's a shiny thing. I'm blinded to the problems.
Yeah, because I would like to talk about that perspective from governments, because in your opinion, how should governments and corporations navigate the ethical implications of using AI, for example, for profiling and monitoring individuals online?
Yeah, you see, this has always been a problem, hasn't it? How do we square between privacy and autonomy and all of that, and then safety and security? I mean, we've been talking about this for hundreds of years. Benjamin Franklin was one of the most famous people to actually say about, do we really want to give up, our privacy and our, and all of those things for a little security, a little safety? Because, of course, it's only perception. Here I am sitting in my house in a provincial town in the UK, and I'm as safe as anybody, really. How much safer can I be? I can't control whether or not bombs drop on me or anything like that. So, as far as my personal safety is concerned, I'm dependent very much on others. And some of the rules and some of the ideas about surveillance, I feel, is more to do with accidental mass surveillance. I'm not saying that the intention necessarily by governments is to go for this totalitarian mass surveillance where we're always scared and Big Brother's out to get. I'm not saying that this isn't in any way intentional, but that is the end result. We already know that people are less likely to be fully expressive if they know they're on camera. They will chill what they do. They will chill what they say. It's creating like a sort of gentle pushing down impression of people, if you like. And I worry about that whole idea, if you like, of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. We want to get the terrorists, we want to get the bad guys, we want to keep people safe, and that's perfectly reasonable. Governments it's one of their number one jobs is to keep their population safe. So yeah, great. But when you go into the world of mass surveillance and the use of AI as well, and again, it takes it up a whole new level when we start using AI for mass surveillance, the oppression, if you like, of the population is almost an unintended consequence. So I have big concerns because, again, it's down to who's actually controlling this AI and who is actually programming in it with what.
Yeah, exactly.
And the political biases as well that we know that companies who have their own agendas may put into those AIs, therefore skewing some of the decisions that it makes in favor of a certain political ideology. That is, of course, a huge danger as well.
Yeah, because as you said already, a little bit like public authorities have increasingly turned to algorithmic systems to regulate and govern society as well. And that comes, of course, with dangers, as you mentioned. Many argue that algorithmic regulation can erode the rule of law. What is your view on this?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it can. It's interesting that there is an idea that we should be, they'll shoot terrorists on sight was something that somebody said in the media recently. Of course, John Charles Menezes, who was killed by the UK police on the underground a few years ago and completely innocent because he had a backpack, does tell us that that sort of thing is quite worrying. So it's already been shown that facial recognition software is really, really bad at recognizing faces from ethnic minorities. Well, of course, it depends where in the world you are, but let's say in Europe and the US, and the faces, it can't read the eye colors, it can't read the faces. I think it was an interesting story a couple of years ago. There was an MIT researcher who happened to be Black, and the facial recognition software wouldn't let her into her own computer.
Because it wouldn't recognize her face?
Because it couldn't recognize her face. So we have a real problem. We also have a problem with false positives. People being accused of being somebody else. If it doesn't recognize your face, then it could put your face with any other face as a nearest, closest. I don't recognize them, but they do look a little bit like this criminal we're after. And then it comes up with a match.
On the other hand, can we design algorithmic regulation that does not erode the rule of law?
Yes, of course. But it requires the cooperation of the companies that are actually creating all of this stuff. Can we go, okay, let's regulate. So we get Sam Altman from OpenAI, we get Mark Zuckerberg in, we get Elon Musk, Bill Gates and a few others, and we sit them all around a table and we're going to get them to agree to regulate their AI. It's not going to happen, is it? That's the problem. There are lots of ways in which we can make safeguards to ensure that AI is a servant rather than a master. But without the cooperation of the people who are actually developing these tools, we are in a very difficult situation. We've got various digital services acts and various things going through in governments in the EU, in the UK, and all over that people are trying to put in place various safeguards. But then it's being eroded by the demands of the US, and that is where most of them are based. So it's, at the moment, we have more of the difficulty, I think, and we're going to have future difficulties with actually being able to control or regulate these systems due to pressure, political pressure coming from the USA.
Would it be an option to develop our own big tech, European big tech?
Well, yes, possibly. Somebody was talking the other day about the idea of creating a European-wide social media site. The fact that we don't have a developed social media site that is offering a safer but different alternative to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the rest of it, would be a step to go. But it would have to be massively advertised, massively marketed. There would also, I think, there's a lot of moves towards banning teenagers from having access to social media and things like that. I think once we start, if this happens, if we start to sort of push back a little, there would then be scope for a European-based that complies with all the regulations, a social media site or sites. But I don't think we're at that place right now, and I don't think we're in a position where we can really do a great deal about it. And this impotence is incredibly frustrating for those of us who want to see a kinder, nicer world.
In your opinion, in a kinder and nicer world, or to make a kinder and nicer world, how could the SMIDGE Project serve as a model for addressing ethical challenges in data protection and privacy when dealing with AI technologies in research?
In general terms, the idea behind Smidge is to have an ethical approach to everything we do. So I think this is something that perhaps would be a really good set of guidelines, if you like, or parameters for other projects and others to work to. So one of the things that I introduced into the SMIDGE project at the start, which has been one of those, if you like, it's been like rumbling along throughout, is the concept of responsible research and innovation. Although I won't go much into the concept of that, it is a way of looking at research that means that we don't just look at the people we're researching. We also look at the people who are doing the researching and the decision makers about, the different parameters, the different things that we do. So I think what we need to do is not just looking at ethics from the perspective of doing something to someone. What do we do about personal data of the person we're researching? What do we do about distribution of that data? What do we, all those things, all those questions, but also taking a momentary step back, a pause, a smidge of a pause before we do something utilizing things like AI. So this actually is, although our focus has been largely on the middle-aged and trying to find out what's making them tick, I think one of the other big strong messages from the SMIDGE project, it's not just related to what you see online, but also related to the practices and the decisions you make as a researcher, is to go and take one step back, particularly those developing technical systems like AI and developing all of that sort of thing, is to always take a momentary pause before moving to the next step and go, okay, what have I done? What does it look like? Have I tested it? How have I tested it? What are the implications? So one of the things that we do in the EU quite often when we're doing the evaluations of projects is we'll ask the project proposers to have an ethics board or an ethics advisor or something like that, so that they've got somebody who is not necessarily a technical expert, but somebody who is an expert in ethics, so that they can help that team to develop whatever it is they're developing in a way that is going to minimize harm, that will provide benefits for society in whatever direction that it's going. So these are some of the ways that development can actually be done in an ethical way. And this is what I think SMIDGE is bringing, is this idea of this smidge, this momentary pause, this momentary reflection before doing whatever it is next that you're going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very positive note to end the episode on, the work that the SMIDGE is doing for a better, safer and kinder world. And that also wraps up today's episode of the Smidgecast. I hope you found our conversation on responsible research in the digital age as thought-provoking as I did. As always, when hosting this podcast, I have so many answers to questions, and that also creates new questions. A huge thank you to our guest, Sara Wilford, for sharing her insights and helping us navigate these ethical challenges.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
I am Ella Bupp. This is a Smidgecast, and if you want to learn more about SMIDGE and our work, visit smidgeproject.eu or connect with us on X at the SMIDGE Project. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider sharing it to support our mission. Thank you for listening.